in putting forward a conservative moral vision, which I really do believe we have to do. I talk about the culture war. I talk about winning the culture. There is no culture without a moral vision. That's what culture is, essentially. There's no art without a moral vision. This is the big mistake that the leftist artists make when they just splash stuff on the wall and think, well, it represents, the way the mind sees reality. No. Art is a moral vision. It is a moral vision put into stories, and images and music all convey a certain way of looking at the world. And putting forward a moral vision, your greatest weapon is joy. Your greatest weapon is joy. If people look at conservatives and they see anger and they see despair and they see a dissatisfaction and disgruntlement all the time, it's just not that appealing. I mean, that's one of the reasons the left is starting to lose. They're angry and hateful and accusatory all the time. They're judgmental all the time. They say, oh, you sent out a tweet when you were 15 years old and it wasn't exactly, didn't call gay people, you lose your job. That's ugly. It is ugly. Grace, joy, these are the things that actually sell. I mean, they're selling tools. They're not just wonderful things for life, which they also are, but they are selling tools for a moral vision. And by joy, I always have to say this because people think I mean happiness, but I don't. Obviously you can't walk around being happy all the time, but you can walk around with gusto. You can walk around enjoying life even when life is a struggle. And you've seen people in this. You've seen people solving problems in a business or solving problems in their life, but doing it with gusto, doing it with a real belief that it is something that can be done and should be done, and it's life. It's vital world. So I've been thinking a lot about a letter I got in the mailbag a while back, and I think I mentioned it once before because it's been on my mind. It was a question about lust, and someone was talking about Matthew, the passage in Matthew where Jesus says, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Very graphic language from the Savior there. But essentially saying, if you're going to sin by looking at people, don't do it. Just get away from it. And somebody wrote in and said that he hated the fact that he had all these feelings for women who were not his wife. And he considered it sin that when he saw a woman who was not his wife, he was attracted to her. And I said, no, that is not what Jesus actually said. He didn't say if you look at her with lust. I mean, lust is a kind of dodgy word, but that's not what he said. He said, if you covet a woman when you look at her, you've already committed adultery in your heart. And what I said is, look, there's a difference between coveting a woman and taking erotic joy in the beauty of women. And because erotic joy, the joy that comes from Eros, the life force, I'm not just talking about sexual joy. When I say Eros, I mean the life force that attaches us to the beauty of the world. That sexual joy is where all of our appreciation of beauty comes from. I mean, the human form is the kind of central idea of beauty that we have, and I don't think we're supposed to walk around ignoring and just say, I'm not going to look at all this beautiful stuff, it's going to kill me. No. C.S. Lewis, who I just think is one of the great thinkers of the last century and one of the underrated thinkers, because while you and I know him, he did not have the effect on the culture that somebody like Sigmund Freud, who was wrong about everything, had. C.S. Lewis, who was right about everything, didn't have that same effect. But C.S. Lewis said that all pleasures come from God. And the Screwtape letters, which is about a demon is the narrator. The demon says, never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are in a sense on God's ground. God made the pleasure. All our research, all the demonic research so far has not enabled us to produce a single pleasure. All we can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which God has produced and use them in ways or in degrees which God has forbidden. We are meant to enjoy the beauty of the world, including the beauty of the opposite sex or the appeal of the opposite sex. However, not that long ago, I was walking in New York City. It was a year or two ago. I was walking in New York City when I suddenly noticed that I was edgy, that something was wrong with me. I was like, there was too much energy going through me. And I thought, what's going on? And I looked around and I realized that I was walking through this construction site and there were huge posters of virtually naked women everywhere. And it was just making me a little bit, it took me over the top. And that's a very sick thing. It's like, why are there all these pictures of sexually available naked women just spread out? And they weren't porno. They were ads. They were mainstream ads. And I thought, that shouldn't be what I'm looking at. That's not actually a good use of this erotic joy that we all feel in life, this joy of Eros. And here's another quote from C.S. Lewis. He says, "You can get a large audience together for a striptease act, that is to watch a girl undress on the stage. Suppose you came to a country where you could fill a theater by simply bringing a covered plate onto the stage and then slowly lifting the cover so as to let everyone see, just before the lights went out, that the cover contained a mutton chop or a bit of bacon. Wouldn't you think that in that country something had gone wrong with the appetite for food?" He's saying there's something wrong with our appetite for sex. Because we're fallen, our appetite for sex is not what it should be. And I think what he's essentially talking about is idolatry. And idolatry is a worship of idols, obviously. It's the worship of idols, but in a broader sense, it's a worship of material things as if they were spiritual things, as if they were the spiritual things they represent. The basic form of idolatry is you make a statue of a god, and then you think that the statue is the god. And idolatry was rejected by the Jews right away. I mean, this was in the 10 Commandments. One of the things is you shall not make for yourself a graven, a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. Now, a lot of people took this, especially like in the Puritan era, a lot of people took this to mean there shouldn't be any icons at all. We should dress in black. There shouldn't be any decorations. There shouldn't be anything. And the Muslims still feel this way. Muslim art is all decorative. There's no pictures of human beings allowed, no pictures of anything, actually. It's just a design. But I think it's the worship that the 10 Commandments forbid, because just a few sentences later, God is instructing the Jews on how to make the Ark of the Covenant, the altar for him. And he tells them to make images of cherubim, of angels to put on the ark. So I don't think he was forbidding actually making art. I think he was forbidding the worship of art. But the ban on idolatry still was central to Jewish thought. And remember, Jesus was born and died a Jew. And this was at the very beginning, like they said, this is the distinction between us and the other people. This is what the Jews said. There's Psalm 115. He says, why do the nations say, where is their God? Where is the God of the Jews? He says, our God is in heaven. He does whatever he wants. But their idols are silver and gold made by human hands. They have mouths, but they can't speak. They have eyes, but they can't see, ears, but they can't hear, noses, but they can't smell. They have hands, but cannot feel, feet, but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. There's a legend that Abraham, the father of all the Jews, that his father was an idol maker. This is not in the Bible, it's in the commentaries, but that he went into his father's shop and broke all the idols. There's a great story, actually. I was taught this in Hebrew school as if it were part of the Bible, actually, where somebody comes in and says to Abraham, I want to buy an idol, and Abraham says, how old are you? And the guy says, I'm 50, and he says, well, then why would you worship something that was made yesterday? Because you should be too old to do that. But here's the thing, right? The heart is an idol-making machine. It's very hard for us to make an object and not imbue that object with the traits of what it represents. Consider this. I used to think about this all the time when I lived in L.A. In L.A., if you are a fatuous, handsome Dan who doesn't do anything nice for anybody, who doesn't even call his mother on Sunday, you can make $250,000 a week playing a cop. If you're a cop, you're making about $60,000, $70,000 a year, right? So in other words, we imbue with value things that represent things instead of the things themselves. I wear this very plain cross around my neck, right? It's just to remind me, it's just something for me to touch it from time to time. If I think I might be letting my thoughts go in the wrong direction, it's something I can remind myself of. But even for me, if I drop this, I suddenly, I dropped the cross. It's just a piece of wood. It is not the thing itself. We are an idol-making machine. Now, here's the thing. As God receded from the Western mind, as people stopped believing in God, all of the truths that Christianity had taught Western people had to be reinvented as non-holy things because they were all true, right? Like Freud knew that everybody experiences guilt, but he didn't believe in original sin, so he actually made up a myth of an original murder. He made up his own original sin just out of his head. And he thought, well, this is better than the Bible because it doesn't have a God in it. So it's just, and this is the way Freud worked. The guy was a genius, but he was also a quack. And which makes him kind of interesting because he had these insights, but they were all so much nonsense in them. So he had to invent an explanation for our idolatry, our natural idolatry. And instead of saying, oh, we make an image of God, but because we can't see God, we imbue the image with meaning, he said, no, God is the idol. God is the idol. We are afraid and we're helpless as little children, so we depend on our fathers to protect us. And so we grow up and we realize we're still helpless. We're still before sickness and death and chaos. We're still helpless, so we invent a father in the sky. The God himself is an idol. We imbue this emptiness with a presence. Marx did the same thing. It's not surprising. I've said this before. It's not surprising these came from secular Jews because the Jews had been so abused that when they lost their religion, they couldn't then become Christians because the Christians had abused them so badly. So they had a motivation to sort of disprove the ideas of the Christian religion. Religious Jews aren't like that at all, but secular Jews do have that tendency to want to prove everything is just physical, is materialist, secular Jewish thinkers. Marx was the same way. He had this theory that he called alienation, which is a very complicated theory. Marx was like not a slouch. It's a complicated theory, but to put it in its simple form, society frustrates our ideals, and so we put those ideals into objects like money. So we put our ideals into money, and money, which used to be a representative of material, we now sell material to get the money. We now start to worship the money. He felt the same way about God, that people are frustrated in their ideal self, so they put their ideal self into the heavens. And Marx didn't want to destroy religion. He didn't want to ban religion. He just thought that once society was perfect, religion would melt away. We wouldn't need it anymore. Now, those arguments, Freud's arguments and Marx's arguments, don't make sense to me. I don't see why we would evolve. Maybe in the Viennese middle class, your father protected you, but I'm not sure all fathers have been protected. And I'm not sure if you live in the wild, your father may be that necessarily protective. And I'm not sure why we would evolve to think our father would be just or would be protective or would be strong or would be courageous. Why do we know those things or what we expect from our father? I think that God has to come first. And I think the same thing is true of Marx. The ideal self, why do we think we have an ideal self? Why do we think there's something we're not that we should be? It's not because of society. I think everybody knows this. Even children know they're not what they should be. We understand that there's something broken about us. So I think that the theories just don't hold together to me. Our innate knowledge of God tells us who our father should be and who we should be. And my idea of psychology is different. I believe our mothers and fathers represent the male and female images of God. And if we love them as human beings with their flaws and don't mistake them for God, we can then, through our love for them, we can then understand God better. But if they abuse us, we think that God, and we take them for gods, then we lose our faith. That happens to people all the time who've been abused by their parents. The same is true for every good thing, okay? And this is why I'm talking about this, because I think it makes us happier to shatter our idols, right? There's a famous expression in sports. They attribute it to Vin Scully. I'm not sure it is Vin Scully, but they say it's Vin Scully. He said, losing feels worse than winning feels good. Okay, and that's true. I'll tell you something that's even more true. All good things are disappointing. All the things you wanted, all the things you think, if I just get this, it'll solve all my problems. They never do solve all your problems. They may be good, you may enjoy them, but they're going to be disappointing. Losing feels worse than winning feels good, because when you lose and you've put your ego into the enterprise, into your ambitions, into your love life, into your sports life, whatever it is, then you feel that your ego has been shattered. But when you win, you haven't won the thing you're looking for, because what you're looking for is God Almighty. And when you start to love things as representative of God, when you start to understand that the cross around your neck or the flag that flies over you or your wife or your ambitions or your career or your children are not God, they are a thing that the language that God speaks his love to you in, then you start to become happy in the things you have. You're not going to have a happy life. Nobody's going to have a happy life, okay? Because life is there's too much sickness and evil and wickedness in life. But you can have a joyful life, and that joy will communicate your faith and your moral vision to other people. And that is how you affect the culture in and of yourself the way you live. I started with C.S. Lewis. I'll end with C.S. Lewis. He said, joy is the yearning for something beyond this world. And since there's no, I'm paraphrasing him, joy is a yearning for something beyond this world. And since we have no appetites that can't be satisfied, we must be made for another world. If you live in that world, you can live without judging others. You can live in joy. And you can be free to sell your moral vision simply by living and simply by the way people look at you. You like rotten content? No, of course not. You like great content, so subscribe right here.